As always, we start from the Parsha of the week, and then we follow through on our own opinion. The Parsha of the week is Ha'azinu. I'm sure you know, you learn basically the Parsha of the Chitas. It's a very unique Parsha. The whole Parsha, except for the last portion, is called a Shira. A Shira means a song. And you must have seen that in the Torah, it is written in a very special way. It's not written normally like in prose. It's written in two columns like a song. Each stands up by itself. Because it's a song. A song implies, at the minimum, something to celebrate, something to sing about. And then when you start reading this, learning this Parsha, you see that it's not all celebratory, it's not all very joyous. There's a big portion, the crux, the middle of the Parsha, probably the biggest chunk of it, is actually talking about how Eden have strayed off the path, how they've forgotten their Creator, and they went off into other ways, and how Hashem had thrown them away and had thrown them into the exile, and He said, I cannot relate to them. You learn the Pasha, you'll see, these kind of expressions. Where is that a song? In general, the Pasha has three sections. The first section speaks about Hashem's deeds that Hashem has done for the Jewish people. As we spoke in the past, and I want to kind of renew this inyan and reflect on it again, particularly before Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish people are different than all the peoples in the world. The Jewish people were made as a people by godly interference. They did not grow out like any other people that developed their culture, so to speak. Americans have an American culture. Now, what's American culture? There are hardly any Americans. There are no Americans that are here longer than 400 years. All Americans come from some European or Asian or African background. They're all immigrants. And yet, over the time, because of the experience of the land, because of the interaction between the various peoples, a culture develops, and it becomes uniquely American. Because they live together, they have common problems, common solutions, and becomes a culture. And this is true regarding all peoples in the world. They settle down in a land, and then as it develops, as it goes on, for a number of years it becomes that country and that nation, except for the Jewish people. This is true in the Jewish history. The Jewish history is the longest history of any people in the world, which means that the Jewish people kept their culture, quote unquote. It's not a culture, it's much more than a culture. But they maintained their uniqueness throughout the turbulent years of world history. We're talking about 3,000-4,000 years. We can't even count that much. What gives them their identity? What gives them their definition as to who they are? We today have Jews literally all over the world. Not the shluchim from the Rebbe that came from here and went all over the world. I'm talking about people who come from the various parts of the world, whose ancestors are there for hundreds of years. Russia, Poland, Africa, Egypt, Spain, Italy, Tunisia, India, wherever you want. And when Jews get together, they recognize each other immediately. Even though they're culturally very different, but still, in essence, they're the same. What is that essence? We have to remember this. It's very important. What is that essence? That essence is their unique recognition of God in the world. And when I say unique recognition, because in fact, even though by now, in today's world, God is recognized by most all people in the world, a lot of people in the world, a large segment of the world, but the Jewish recognition of God is totally different, is unique. And this is what identifies them. This is what identifies the Jewish people as a whole, and this is what identifies each individual Jew as an individual. When a person wants to ask himself a question, who am I? What makes me a Jew? He has to find this unique cognizance. And from there begins his development. Other nations let's say in America there are French, German, from German ancestry, from French ancestry, from African ancestry, all kinds of different ancestry. When they define themselves, they say that he's a French American, he's a German American, he's an Italian American, which means that basically he is molding into the American mold, but he is of this ancestry. A Jew doesn't say that he's a Jewish American. That would be a total misrepresentation. He would say he's an American Jew, because he is essentially a Jew, but he's got an American citizenship. This is where he lives, and this is how he acts. This is the common language that he has. These are the experiences that he has. But what he is a Jew. And therefore, he has this unique unit, American Jew, a Russian Jew, Polish Jew, French Jew, English Jew. It's all the same Jew, except the different cultures. And as I said, coming into Rosh Hashanah, in this particular moment in the year, it's important to reflect on this, and to understand what is it that we bring with us to Rosh Hashanah. How do we come Rosh Hashanah to Shul? Are we come Rosh Hashanah to Shul as Americans, or Russians, or we come to Rosh Hashanah to Shul as Jews? Even though we use different machzorim, one uses the English translation, one uses the Spanish translation, one uses the Russian translation. That doesn't make any difference whatsoever. And thus, the Pasha of the week, Hazinu, which always is related to this period of the year, it's always essentially after Rosh Hashanah, whether the week after Rosh Hashanah or the week after Yom Kippur, but it's after Rosh Hashanah in this period. The first portion of the week of the Seder relates what Hashem, essentially the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people. How the Jewish people are Hashem's children, and how He brought them forth, and how He had given them the Torah, and how He had chosen them from all other nations. All that, I'm sure you already learned. This is basically what Rashi explains in the first portion of the Pasha. The second part in the Pasha is that part which I mentioned before, that puts the whole idea that this is a song in question, because the second Pasha speaks about that Hashem is disappointed in His children, that His children are straying off and getting lost and forgetting who they are. And as a result, in order to remind them and to give them a shake-up and to force them to reflect back on themselves and where they're coming from, Hashem throws them into Golus and puts them through all kinds of difficult moments. This is the middle portion, which is quite lengthy and quite vividly discussed in the Pasha. And then the third portion in this song is that ultimately Hashem takes His nation back. That ultimately they all turn around and they say, what happened to me? Where have I strayed? And where is my God? That is definitely, so to speak, the last moment in every Jew's life. I don't mean last moment of life. This is what it ultimately leads to when he wakes up, and the Jewish people as a whole. And ultimately, this last section speaks about the final Geula, the Geula with Moshiach. That Hashem brings us back takes us back, and rebuilds the Beis Hamikdash and brings the Jewish people back where they belong. As I mentioned just a moment ago, this cycle is true on the Jewish people as a whole, and this cycle is true on every individual Jew as well. That ultimately, no matter what a person's experiences are and how difficult his travels are, he turns around and he wakes up and he recognizes who he truly is, and he finds his way back to God, find his way back to his Jewish identity. Jewish identity and God is one and the same thing. This is a synonym. Because I said before, the Jewish identity comes from the fact that they're uniquely connected, their unique connection with God. There are no two identities, no two things in there. So now, coming back to this question, okay, we understand the first part to be a song, we understand the last part to be a song. What about the middle? How is that a song? How does one perceive discussing the difficulties, and I don't want to use sharp words, but all the travails that an individual goes through, both physically and spiritually. Spiritual pain is even more difficult to suffer and to live through than physical pain. How does one relate to that as a song? I saw recently, in the Beis Mashiach, it happens, a little story of the Baal Shem Tov. It's interesting, I just saw it, and it just comes to mind. The story is that Baal Shem Tov saw a Yid saying Tachnun. You know what Tachnun is? Expressing his sins. And he's singing. Baal Shem Tov asked him, what are you singing? You're repenting. What kind of singing is this? So the Yid says that if there are dirty dishes in a king's palace, he used another analogy, but basically the same idea. There is dirt, and you take these dishes and you rub them clean, you wash them out. So you're dealing with the dirt, but in the meantime, you present the king with a clean dish. Isn't that a reason for joy? Is that a reason for song? Baal Shem Tov liked that answer very much. In other words, it expresses very simply, from a simple Jew, how, yes indeed, going through a lot of challenges, and a lot of impurity that you have to face with and so forth. But ultimately, what this all leads to, you have to remember, this is not something that happens accidentally. It all leads to the purification of the Jewish soul and the elevation of the human being, and ultimately the transformation of the whole world. That's what it all leads to. So although that the experience itself is really quite painful, but the underlying stream, the underlying force, and that life force that goes through it, is the sense that we are going someplace, we're going towards the third moment in the Pasha, the redemption of Mashiach. No suffering is in vain. No challenge, no difficulty that a person faces is in vain. As an aside, we'll come back to this issue in a moment, just to illustrate what it means, what a person can accomplishes through facing up to his challenges. One may think that the reason that he has got challenges, the reason that he has spiritual difficulty, he cannot see clearly what, Yiddishkeit, he cannot relate easily to Yiddishkeit, relate easily to God, can relate easily to Torah. It's because of all kinds of different influences, different experiences that he had. So one would think, this is all in vain. It didn't have to be that way. What's the point of it? I could have come to it in a smooth, straight way, and I wouldn't have to go through all these challenges. The real truth is that anything that is a challenge, anything that poses a difficulty in relating to Torah, relating to God, is a real difficulty. What I mean is, it's not just circumstantial. It's not just by accident it happened to me. It exists in the world as a difficulty. And every time that a Yid, a Jew, fights through it, he is fighting through with this difficulty not only for himself, but he actually has an effect on the whole world. And this is illustrated by the famous story of the Beis Yosef, which again you may have heard previously. The story is the Beis Yosef, for those who don't know, Beis Yosef, the Yosef Karu, was a great Rav, a pillar of Jewish scholarship. He wrote the Shulchan Aruch, a giant that the whole world is based on his writings since the time that he was here. He was in the time of the Arizal. He was actually in the same city in the same time as the Arizal. The Beis Yosef was the Rav, and the Arizal was the Mekubal, was the Magid. He was the Chassidish Rebbe, and he was the Rav in town. So the story is that the Arizal, that the Beis Yosef, one time was learning, and he was learning Gemara and a Tosfos, and he came up to a Tosfos that he found it extremely difficult to understand. And he labored over this Tosfos for hours to understand the Tosfos. I would imagine that the difficulty that he had to understand the Tosfos was not just to understand how to translate the words and how to fit them into congruent sentences. He had a difficulty with this Tosfos. And he labored for hours to understand this Tosfos. Finally, he came through, and a breakthrough. He came through with and understood what is the kavanah, so to speak, what is the intent of this Tosfos. What is the whole story about it? And then he went to Beis Medrash. He came to Beis Medrash, and he's walking through, and he sees two young men sitting and learning Gemara. And they happen to learn the same Gemara that he was learning, and the same Tosfos that he just now finished learning. So he became curious to see how they would interpret, how they would explain this Tosfos, because they were learning Chavrusa. So they were talking to each other and explaining to each other what they were learning. So he stopped, he eavesdropped. What eavesdrop means, he listened in to see how they're going to explain to each other this Tosfos. They're learning the Tosfos, and they're going through, and they're explaining to each other, not a single hitch, not a kink, not a stop. They just go through and explain to each other Tosfos exactly the way the Beis Yosef explained it to himself after hours of labor. Beis Yosef was taken aback. What's going on? I mean, Beis Yosef wasn't about Gaiva. He was a Yid, but still, it kind of dawned on me, what's going on? I mean, am I laboring so much because I'm just a deprived guy? I don't have the brain power to understand the simple Tosfos. So he went to the Arizal, and he asked him to explain what happened over here. And the Arizal explained to him the following. You should know that the whole difficulty that we have in learning Torah is because of klipa, of the impurity that is in the world, that conceals the oyer, it conceals the light and the true perspective, the true essence of Torah. And this is why we have difficulty, because we come from an outside, and we try to understand what's going on inside the Torah, and there are barriers and obstacles all along. However, once one person labors through and works through and reveals that aspect of Torah, once it's revealed in the world, it's brought down into the world, then this difficulty is now eliminated. It's not just that he knows the Tosfos. He actually destroyed that klipa, so to speak. He removed that element, that concealment. You labored over the Tosfos, and you revealed that aspect of Torah in the world, which made it smooth and easy for those other young men to learn without a hitch. That's what the Arizal will explain to you. This is significant and pertinent to each one of us. We have to understand that if a certain particular aspect, difficulty, a certain particular darkness did not exist in the world, it wouldn't exist by us either. We are not artificially creating problems for ourselves. It exists by us because it exists in the world. And exists for thousands and thousands of others. And every time, that a Yid, an individual Yid, labors through his difficulty and reveals to himself the truth of a certain point in Torah, a certain point in Yiddishkeit, a certain point in Amunah, in faith, he actually affects the whole world. He eliminates that particular darkness from the world. And that makes it easier, and that reveals it for everybody else. This, in fact, is a practical thing that the Rebbe, in the time when Russian Jewry still were suffering, I mean, Baruch Hashem now things have changed dramatically, but in the times in the 80s, 1980, 1970, the 80s, I understand, the 70s were very, very difficult times for the Russian Jews. Extremely difficult times. The Rebbe said that when Yidden do special mitzvahs over here with special enthusiasm, that helps the Jews over there in Russia. That gives them strength, and that gives them and the power to overcome their difficulties. So, therefore, when the Parsha speaks about the exile, Eden strayed, the possibility of the Jewish people to stray off the path is not a mistake. The possibility of straying off the Jewish path is because there is that klipa, there is that darkness that covers the truth. And because it's possible to cover the truth, that's why it's possible for them to stray. When they go through the exile, and they work it through, and they come back, having recognized their mistake, and they rehabilitate themselves, that not just rehabilitate themselves, it rehabilitates the whole world. It eliminates that particular aspect from difficulty in the world. And thus, this is instrumental, ultimately, to bring the Geula Shlema to build Mashiach. And this is how it's befitting that the whole Pasha, all three sections of the Pasha, are a song. Because all three sections in the Pasha ultimately lead and speak about the ultimate, the Geula Shlema, speak about the Geula with Mashiach. This brings to light another important Indian, very pertinent. Clearly, this Pasha speaks about the main thrust of the Pasha is that Yidden will ultimately do tshuva, even after that the whole nation, Rahman Islam, will stray and be driven out of their land. They will ultimately do tshuva. But it speaks about the whole idea of tshuva in the form of a song. And this is the other this point that we mentioned before. But I want to elaborate a little bit, and then perhaps we'll have another insight. In Teshuvah, the Alter Rebbe explains, based on the Zohar, that there are two, generally speaking, two distinct levels of Teshuvah. One is called Teshuvah Tator, the lower Teshuvah. One is called Teshuvah Ilah, a higher Teshuvah. Now, since we're all Baalei Teshuvah, so it behooves us to understand what is the meaning of the word Teshuvah. And because we have a personal, our own interpretation, our own understanding what it is that we're going through. What is Teshuvah about? So the Alter Rebbe explains that there's Teshuvah Tator and there's Teshuvah Ilah. So before I go into Teshuvah Tator, Teshuvah Ilah, I want to briefly speak about the whole concept, the meaning of the word Teshuvah. It says that Teshuvah can correct any misdeed person did an Aveira, then he can do Teshuvah, and he can correct that Aveira. How is it that Teshuvah can correct something that was done previously? What's so special about Teshuvah? Teshuvah is a mitzvah like all other mitzvahs. How can one deed correct another deed? It was done already. And as a matter of fact, it says, I'm sure you all heard of this, that Teshuvah is a tremendous thing, to the extent that a Baal Teshuvah, in a very real way, is superior to a tzaddik. And the Gemara says, even tzaddikim gurim cannot stand where the Baal Teshuvah stand. What's so special about Teshuvah? On the contrary, Who wants to be a Baal Tshuva? I don't want to be a Baal Tshuva. I don't want to have sins. I don't want to have... and that's a struggle. And what is it for? And what is the whole concept of Tshuva? So, to illustrate this, to explain the concept I want to illustrate is from a simple physical experience that we have, and then we'll translate it how this pertains to Tshuva, to Ruchnis. From Gashmis, we'll explain how it pertains to Ruchnis. In Gashmius, in the physical world, in our physical experience, we have the following phenomenon that we don't pay attention to. But really, it's extremely significant, extremely revealing. And one of the things of our intelligence is that we should recognize such significant experiences. A simple thing. A person gets a cut in the finger. A real cut. And the two pieces of skin and even flesh are now separated. His finger is damaged. Physically, it's damaged. He takes a Band-Aid, covers up the wound. The Band-Aid doesn't do anything except keep it clean and keep it from getting infected. It doesn't in itself sew it together. It doesn't do anything. Just covers it up. And 2 days later, he takes off the Band-Aid, and he can't find the place where the cut was. It heals back perfectly like it never was. And what happened? How did it heal back perfectly like that? It was cut. So the doctors, the scientists will tell you, because the molecules, the molecules that's in the flesh and in the skin, the molecules multiply, they split, and they join together, and that's how it happens. But the question is, how do the molecules know which way to join? Why don't the molecules form another mountain over there and join 2 inches above the finger? How do they know to join exactly over here? Exactly the way the finger is. The answer obviously is that in this finger there are 2 parts. There is the physical part and there's the spiritual part. The spiritual part is the neshama. The neshama is a ruchnis. The neshama is a godly force. And the neshama does not get damaged by a cut. The finger gets damaged, not the neshama. The neshama remained whole even while the finger was cut. And the neshama knows exactly what the finger is supposed to look like. The finger looked like this in the first place because the neshama directed it to grow in this way. And this is what happens. You cover up this finger so no infection sets in. And then the neshama directs the molecules to grow back together exactly the way the neshama wants them. The molecules are directed by the neshama. And that's how it grows together. So this is a phenomenon that explicitly, in our own experience, brings us face to face with the essence of life, with the essence of the neshama. This is an illustration for the principle of tshuva. We have 613 mitzvahs. And every one of these mitzvahs we have to do because Hashem commanded us to do them. We know that. And there's no exception to that. It's not only you put on tefillin because Hashem told me to do it. We keep Shabbos because Hashem told me to do it. We don't rob, we don't steal, we don't lie. All of these things also because Hashem told us to do it. Everything is because Hashem told us to do it. But there is still, in every mitzvah, there's still two parts. There is the mitzvah that we were commanded to do, the particular action, and there is the fact that Hashem told us to do it. So in the foreground, what we see is the deed itself, like put on film, and Hashem is the one who told us to do this, to put it on film. But effectively, what we are doing it is putting on film because Hashem told us to do it. So the focus is on the action that we are doing. On the tefillin and tzitzis and Shabbos and kashrus and so forth. Tshuva is unique. Tshuva is unique. It's also a mitzvah in the Torah. But that mitzvah says one thing. Turn towards God. Tshuva does not have another object, another content. Do this because Hashem wants you to do it. Tshuva is a direct connect. Turning back to Hashem. Because that tshuva is a direct connect to turning back to Hashem. And Hashem and the connection between a Yid and Hashem cannot be damaged by any action. Just like the illustration of the finger with the soul. The finger can be damaged, but the soul in the finger cannot be damaged. So similarly, any kind of mistakes, any kind of misdeeds, any kind of confusion that a person can get into is possible on all kinds of different levels, except one, his recognition of God. This is the need for truth. That always remains the same. And that's what tshuva is. Tshuva is, the word tshuva means to return. And where do we return? Returning back to Hashem. I guess I strayed off Hashem's path and I'm coming back. Where do I come back to Hashem? That's what tshuva is about. This is why tshuva is capable to heal every wound. Because you're going directly to the soul. You're bypassing all the various activities, the various parts of life. You're going straight to Hashem. Just like in case of the finger. You completely ignore the finger. You go to the soul and say, you heal it. And the soul comes in and heals it. As a matter of fact, if the wound is so big that you need stitches, it will never heal perfectly like it never was there. Once you have to play around with the physical, it's never going to be that perfect. It's going to be perfect only if you can leave it directly to the soul. Then it's going to be perfect. And this is the principle of tshuva in general. And in that, there are two types. There is what the Alter says, tshuva tato, the lower level of tshuva, and tshuva ilo means the higher level of tshuva. The lower level of tshuva is that level of tshuva that essentially deals with the misdeeds. Oh, I made this mistake and I want to rise above it. I want to be forgiven and I want to rise above it. I wanted to heal. I wanted to heal because I don't want this mistake to haunt me anymore. And so forth. This is called tshuva tato. So Tshuva ilah, however, higher tshuva, is from an entirely different perspective. To explain tshuva ilah, again, so that we can relate to it, I'm up to tshuva ilah, it's not time to sleep. So, 2 more minutes. Tshuva ilah, one way to illustrate the concept of tshuva ilah is as follows. The Gemara says that a person is never satisfied. A person is never, in the world, if a person seeks worldly satisfaction, he'll never be satisfied. And gives the illustration that if a person has 100, he immediately wants 200. He has 200, he immediately wants 400. And you heard, I'm sure, this saying. Yesh limoni, it's a Mosayim. Yesh limosayim, it's a dalad mayis, and so forth. Therefore, he is never satisfied. And the intent of this saying is that the world is inherently lacking, and he can never satisfy. And the proof of it is that a person is always wants more. But then the question comes up that it would seem that the same thing is true in Ruchnis. A person learns and is never satisfied. He always wants more. He learned one blood Gemara, he wants another one. He wants two. He wants a smicha rabbanos. He always wants more. So what's the difference? What's the difference? The difference is very, very fundamental. When we say that a person has 100 and then he immediately wants 200, the reason he wants 200 is that when he got the 100, he realized that the 100 does not really do anything. It's not the real thing. When I have 200, that's going to be real. That's going to give me some real service and real backing. Then finally Rebbe helps and he gets 200 and says, it's not the real, it's still lacking. 400, that's going to do the real thing. He gets to 400, he says, doesn't really do anything. I need 800. And this goes indefinitely. Do you know how indefinitely it goes? If a person has 1 billion, he sees right away that that's not the real thing. He wants 2 billion. If a person would base his happiness, so to speak, on worldly possession and worldly success, he would always find that which is lacking. Because it is inherently lacking. In Ruchnis, in Torah, the reason that a person wants more is not because that which he has is lacking, is not the real thing. Just the reverse. He has learned a little bit, and he feels how great it is and how wonderful it is. He says he wants more of it. Not because what he has is insignificant. On the contrary, because what he has is so significant and so wonderful, he wants more of it. So there, he is not coming from a position of a negative, of dissatisfaction. On the contrary, he comes from a position of satisfaction and he wants more. He wants to go higher. This is essentially the difference in the principle of Tshuva Tato and Tshuva Ilah. Tshuva Tato, a person feels his lack. He feels that he has made a mistake. He feels his lowliness, his distance from God. And he wants to rectify. He wants to establish some closeness. Why? Because he can't be in a distance. Tshuva ilah has a completely different implication. He senses it's so wonderful, he wants more. He wants a higher madrig. And then you have the higher. That's tshuva ilah. And thus, in terms of on the practical level, tshuva tator, a person can feel remorse, can feel unhappiness because he reflects on all his mistakes and all his misdeeds, or his mistakes or others' mistakes. Regardless, the point is he reflects what he is lacking. That puts him in a morass, in an unhappy state of mind. Tshuva ilah, that can be done in a happy state of mind, because on the contrary, it's done b'simcha. Because of his simcha, because of his wonderful experience, he wants to go further and further. Therefore, since we are talking over here in Pashas Ha'azinu, Pashas Ha'azinu illustrates the union of tshuva b'simcha. It's a shira, it's a song. So in other words, Ha'azinu is actually referring to tshuva ilah. So this higher level of tshuva that is done, that the tshuva itself is done b'simcha. There is joy in the tshuva itself. There is joy in the dealing with overcoming all the difficulties. Because it's not the difficulties that we are concerned about. It is the beauty of the redemption and the greatness of where we want to go to. Of godliness, of the Torah that we recognize, that we come to know. The time has caught up with me, so just want to say this to all of us here. Rosh Hashanah, everybody, Rosh Hashanah is a day of tshuva. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, a day of tshuva. But this is a day of tshuva that we do with joy, because it's a day of tshuva where we recognize, we don't reflect on the negativity. We have to reflect, like I mentioned before, everyone individually has to reflect and recognize who he is, and that he as an individual is a member of the Jewish people, and as such he is directly connected to the creator of the Jewish people, to God himself. And God, just like we said before in the illustration of the saw that heals the damaged finger, that relationship and that connection is invulnerable to any kind of damage. It's pure no matter what experiences a person has. And it is possible for us to draw out and to reveal that purity and that pure connection. And that is the object of the tshuva of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah, we come, every individual and collectively, we come to Hashem and say, here we are, and we want you to be our king. Which means we connect directly to the Meibush, to Hashem. And the important thing is that it's imperative that we reflect on understanding on what it means to be a Yid, what it means to come to Shul on Rosh Hashanah and say that we want that the Rebbe should be the king of the world, my king. This is a form, this is an experience, it's a manner of rising above one's mundane and worldly experiences, and recognizing for that moment, recognizing what his own truth is. Rebbe says that each one of us should have that pure moment and should and come to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur with full purity and full force and fuel and complete stepping forward, and this will surely help each one to accomplish in the following year all that they need to accomplish for their own success, both spiritually in terms of learning and in terms of whatever else they need to accomplish. So have a good year.